He refused to let anyone touch him because he thought he'd shatter into pieces. One of Europe's most powerful kings genuinely believed he was made of glass. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a true story about madness, power, and fear, and how the most powerful man in France became a prisoner of his own imagination. In this video, we're diving into the unbelievable true story of the glass delusion and the bizarre case of King Charles VI, a ruler who thought he could break like a wine glass if someone so much as bumped into him. But here's the twist. He wasn't alone. This wasn't just his delusion. In the 15th century, it actually became a thing. So what caused this strange epidemic of glass people? And how did a king rule a nation when he didn't even feel human anymore? Stick around. The deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Imagine this. You're walking through the grand halls of a French palace in the early 1400s. The air smells of incense and old wood. Tapestries line the walls. Guards are posted everywhere. And then you see him, the King of France, Charles VI. He's dressed in robes, not because he's just royal, but because he's afraid regular clothes might scrape his skin and shatter his body. He's not walking freely. He's moving slowly, carefully, as if every step might be his last. Why? Because Charles VI believed, truly, deeply, in his bones, that he was made of glass. Let's rewind. Charles VI became King of France in 1380. He was just 11 years old. At first, he was known as Charles the Beloved. Young, fair, kind-hearted. People had high hopes. But as he grew older, the cracks began to show. Not in his body, in his mind. By his early 20s, Charles started having these violent, unexplainable episodes. He'd forget who he was. He'd forget his wife, his kids, even his name. One time, he was riding with his guards, and without warning, he drew his sword and started hacking them down. No warning, no reason, just chaos. This became known as the Bal des Ardents, the Burning Men's Ball, and it was the beginning of what we now think was likely schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, though medieval doctors had no clue what was going on. They thought it was demons, curses, bad air, or worse, punishment from God. Now here's where things get really strange. Around the age of 30, Charles became convinced that his body was no longer flesh and bone, but glass. He refused to let people touch him. He sat still for hours. He wore special padded clothes. He ordered iron rods to be sewn into his robes so that his spine would stay straight and no one could accidentally bump into him. This wasn't some odd quirk. It was a deep, terrifying belief. He wasn't acting, he was terrified. He genuinely thought that if he fell or even moved the wrong way, he'd shatter into 1,000 pieces. And here's the wild part. He wasn't the only one. The glass delusion wasn't just Charles's private nightmare. Between the 1400s and 1600s, dozens of people, usually educated or wealthy, came to believe they were made of glass. They refused to sit down. Some wouldn't leave their beds. One man in Spain reportedly built a straw-lined room and only walked barefoot to avoid breaking. Even René Descartes, the famous philosopher, wrote about patients who thought they were glass bottles. So, what was going on? Modern psychologists look at the glass delusion as a type of somatic delusion, basically when your brain convinces you that your body is different than it really is. It's like body dysmorphia on steroids. Instead of thinking you're ugly or malformed, you believe you're made of glass, see-through, fragile. One wrong move and snap, that's it. But why glass? Why not wood or stone? Here's where it gets fascinating. Back in the 1400s, glass was the miracle material. It was new, rare, shiny, beautiful, but fragile. It symbolized wealth and status, but also vulnerability. You were powerful, but breakable, just like a king. And remember, Charles was under massive pressure. France was in the middle of the 100 Years' War. He was losing allies. His own family was plotting against him. The fear of shattering, it wasn't just about his body, it was about his entire world. Let's look at what was happening outside Charles's mind. France was in chaos. Nobles were fighting for control. England was invading. The economy was a mess. Inside the palace, Charles's wife, Isabeau of Bavaria, was trying to keep things together. His brother and cousin were basically running a shadow government. Nobody knew when Charles would be sane or violent again. People were calling him Charles the Mad now, not beloved. He spent long periods locked in rooms, rocking back and forth. Sometimes he recognized his children. Sometimes he thought he was a child. Sometimes he thought he was made of glass. Sometimes he thought he was already dead. And yet, he was still king. For 32 years, France was ruled by a man who was mentally lost. He was a puppet, and the real power was in the hands of nobles who wanted more control. Now think about that. A kingdom literally at war, being run by a man who's afraid to be touched because he might break. How does that even happen? Here's the bigger question. How do we explain this kind of illness in history? Mental health wasn't understood back then. There was no therapy, no medication. If someone started acting strangely, the answer was usually one of three things: sin possession, or punishment from God. That's it. No science, no nuance. So instead of care, people were locked up, isolated, feared. Kings were no exception. In fact, it was even worse for them, because they were expected to be divine, almost superhuman. So when a king broke down mentally, it was like watching a god fall from the sky. People didn't talk about it openly. It was hidden, whispered about, covered up, because admitting the king was mentally ill, that could bring down the whole system. But here's where things turn. After Charles VI, the glass delusion didn't go away, it spread. There are written accounts of noblemen, professors, even royalty in Spain, Germany, and the Netherlands experiencing the same delusion. Some believed they were glass goblets. Some thought their hearts were made of glass. Some believed only certain parts of their bodies were glass, like their heads or arms. One patient even believed he was a urinal made of glass. This wasn't just madness, it was a trend of madness, a pattern, and it tells us something profound. Our minds don't work in isolation. Even our delusions are shaped by the world around us. Today, people with psychosis might believe they're being watched by the government, or that their phones are spying on them. That's our modern glass. Back then, the cutting-edge, magical, mysterious material was glass. That's what made it so scary, so believable. And when someone as powerful as a king believes something, other people start to believe it too. In 1422, Charles VI died. He was 53. At the end, he was a ghost of the young king he once was. France was torn apart. The 100 Years' War would drag on, and his son, Charles VII, would inherit a broken country and the heavy legacy of a mad father. But even after death, Charles's story stuck. Not because he ruled well, not because he won wars, but because he believed he was glass. And that story, strange, fragile, and haunting, stuck with people for centuries. It forced scholars, doctors, and philosophers to start asking better questions. What is the mind? What happens when it breaks? Can society break with it? Even now, the glass delusion is studied in medical journals and psychology textbooks. It's a symbol of how deeply the human brain can be influenced by fear, pressure, and power. What do we take away from all this? Charles VI wasn't just a king who went mad, he was a mirror reflecting the fragility of power, the confusion of mental illness, and the deep universal fear of breaking under pressure. And maybe that's what the glass really symbolized. Not just fragility, but the illusion of control. One wrong move, and everything can shatter. Thanks for listening. If you want more bizarre history story, please hit like and subscribe.